joining us for our webinar today. The topic of the webinar is preparing for a data breach. Thrilled to present a guest speaker and some really interesting content based on this speaker's significant experience in this area about best practices for preparing for a data breach. So first, some housekeeping items. Wanted to let you know that we will be following up with a copy of today's slides with all of you. So no worries, we got you covered there, and the next day or so you'll be getting that in your inbox. Also wanted to let you know that we will have questions at the end, so by all means be thinking about that as we're walking through the content. You can use the Q&A functionality within GoToWebinar to submit those, and we look forward to getting some good questions and answering them for you. So first I'll start off with some introductions of myself and my guest speaker that we have with us today. We're thrilled to have with us. And then we'll set the table a little bit on today's reality with breaches and data loss, share with you some of the latest headlines and some of the latest data around breach. And then we'll dive into the main event, which is tips for preparing for a breach. Our guest speaker will be presenting to you a process for how to do that with some detailed tips for how to get it right. And then, as I said, we will wrap things up with a Q&A to give you a chance to pick the brain of the expert that we're able to have join us. So first, let me do some quick introductions. My name is Ted Julian, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Co3. And over the past 15 years or so, I've been both a security and compliance entrepreneur, as well as a security industry analyst at some of the different analyst firms out there. And through the course of that experience, I've had the good fortune to work with a bunch of different organizations of all shapes, sizes, different vertical markets to help understand and try to tackle their security and compliance challenges. But more importantly, I'm thrilled to have with me here today Bob Siegel. Bob is the privacy strategist and principal at a newly formed firm called PrivacyRef LLC, and he previously was a senior manager of worldwide privacy and compliance at Staples, and he holds the CIPP-US and CIPP-IT certifications. Let me share with you just a little bit more about his background, because he has extensive professional experience in the development of privacy policies and procedures, the definition of performance metrics to evaluate privacy maturity, and the evaluation of compliance. He most recently was at Staples, where he was the Worldwide Privacy and Compliance Senior Manager, their Fortune 150 retailer. His responsibilities there included the development, awareness, and compliance for global privacy-related policies and procedures for more than 50 business units across 26 countries. He founded PrivacyRef to help businesses create, define, and manage their privacy programs, and he's put together services that include assessments of your current privacy practices, also establishment and staffing of a privacy office for those of you who could use that, and other things. So thanks a ton for joining me, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me. You guys have a great product. I've enjoyed working in the past, and I'm looking forward to this webinar.
Awesome. Thanks. So with that, let's dive a little bit into first who Co3 is, so you can understand, if nothing else, just the perspective we bring to our conversation. We'll go through this very quickly so we can get to the meat of things here. We've built an incident management system, as some of you are aware, that is a web-based SaaS platform. It helps companies that have PI, like those in retail and these other markets you see here, since they're regulated by federal, state, trade, and other regulations, remain compliant to prepare themselves and so on for breaches when they happen. Because it's a SaaS app and the way that we've built it, our customers can attest to the fact that it can be deployed quickly, it's easy to use, and you can get value out of it very quickly. So that said, let's share with you some of the latest stuff that's going on in the marketplace around breach. We'll start with a story that came in Reuters just last week, where they were sort of revisiting what's happened at a large payment provider based on a breach that they disclosed over the last 12 months. And combing through financial reports on their latest conference call, they revealed that their fourth quarter profit fell 90% on the costs related to that breach. And that was the result of a $84.4 million pre-tax charge that they had to take. They further revealed in that conference call that there's another, I believe, $10 to $30 million in potential charges related to this particular breach. Very unfortunate situation, but they are far from alone. They're far from the first and unfortunately far from the last of this kind of situation. As we all know, breaches like this certainly can't help but grab the headlines, and they certainly serve as a wake-up call to the industry. You can see here just some headlines from the Zappos / Amazon breach that happened over the last 12 months. Also got a fair run in the press. But then some other headlines I thought you might be interested. There's a Unisys study out there where they talked to American consumers and found that more than half would sue a company that loses its personal information. This sort of feeling amongst consumers and other factors have certainly led to a preponderance of class actions. You can pretty much count on, if you're a household brand that everybody's aware of, if you have a breach that winds up into the papers, having facing a class action within a day or two of that news getting out. And while it's getting a little bit old at this point, you still can't help but take pause, I guess, at the TRICARE situation with that particular lawsuit at a whopping $4.9 billion. Look, we're all aware of these as privacy professionals. Sometimes this can be effective to share this information, to elevate what we're trying to do within the organization, within management, because the second half of this slide is the best way I've found to highlight the fact that those headline-grabbing breaches occur. We all know about them, but the fact is, again, as we all know, the bad guys went pro some time ago. They are after this kind of information wherever they can get it, and they're not just going after the big guys anymore. That's part of what drives some of the breaches that you see listed here. I pulled from DataLoss.DB just a few minutes ago. But then there's the fact that, look, you don't have to have a cyber break-in for data to be put in harm's way. Anything from a lost box of paper records to statements sent to the wrong location or what have you can all trigger a breach scenario. The regulators treat them all the same. So you can see here things like Paper Street Media, Elections Ontario, and so on. Organizations that aren't by any means household names, but that suffer breaches and thus have to work their way through the consequences of that kind of a thing. This ongoing reality has not been lost on most any industry watcher or other people involved in privacy, security, or compliance, and so that goes for Forrester as well. Some of you may have seen this report. If you haven't, here's a good heads up that it's out there. They did it at the end of last year, called Planning for Failure, and some good data in here where they asked companies they surveyed if they'd had a breach, and if so, how many. And some interesting data came out of that. To me, I think the big takeaway is not just that 25% experienced a breach that they were willing to admit, but the quantity. If you look at the 3 to 5 times up to more than 25 times, you've got 8, 11, 12, 13% having a minimum of 3 breaches over a 12-month time frame. But then the other thing, too, of course, is the people that don't know or that were unwilling to disclose. If you were able to get them to disclose and roll that data back into these other categories, it'd be very interesting indeed to see what this reality looks like. Again, some data that may help you build your case internally for the good work you're doing. It's the regulatory environment combined with this data that led to this strong call to action from Forrester, which you see here on the slide, that it's imperative to get your incident management program together if you don't have one already. So good fodder to use with management or others to bolster to do your efforts or to get them to use that as a catalyst for improvement, more resources, more time, energy, budget, whatever it might be. Always worth setting the table on the kinds of data loss that happens. Malicious cyber attacks, we've said many times, they get the headlines, lost stolen assets, internal employee actions. These things all drive breaches. But let's not forget third-party leaks. This is a major issue that can drive a lot of exposure, and it's surprising how often it gets overlooked, even by some pretty crafty and shrewd people that are trying to build compliance and privacy programs within their organization. Even small organizations routinely have relationships with third parties where they share sensitive information, and if that third party should lose it, as the collector of that information, you're the one who's on the hook. So you need to be aware of this and include third-party leaks in your broader efforts. And whether that's contractual language you put in place with that third party to protect you or just identifying the procedures that you want to follow, it's an absolute must as part of your strategy. These things, can't be ignored. Boy, the headline I talked earlier about that large payments provider being the latest reminder that these things can really get out of hand quickly and have a dramatic impact on the business. So what do you do? Well, most of you are probably following a life cycle of best practices, somewhat like what you see described here on this slide. The 4 pillars, really, of solid breach management. They are breach preparedness, assessment, management, and reporting, so that you can improve your organizational readiness on the prepare side. You don't want to go try this stuff out for the first time with a live event. Simulations, fire drills, whatever you want to call them, are a must to make sure that you're as ready as you can be and you've worked out the kinks before that day happens. On the assessment side of things, very important to have the ability to quantify potential impact. Great idea to run PIAs or privacy impact assessments, not just to assess changes in the business and the privacy impact that they can have, but third parties. They're a great business exercise, as I said, to try to characterize these changes. And for privacy professionals in particular, are a great way to elevate the importance of what you're doing and to ground that in real numbers to the business. And you can do this almost as often as you want if you're resourceful about finding opportunities to do it. And having done so, you're able to prove the importance of you and your team's efforts, even absent a breach. You don't want to wait for a breach to demonstrate the ROI on why you're there and why you and your team's efforts are so important. And so frankly, all these best practices here, but certainly PIAs are one way to elevate that cause in a way that's really grounded in the business. Management, being able to, in a very as timely a fashion as possible, get to incident response plans as needed and start to execute against them. Some of these regulations, you do not have a long fuse, so it's important to have everything you need in place to be able to do that quickly. And then, of course, reporting, critical for everything from justifying your efforts and showing what a good job you're doing or highlighting where there's areas for improvement. Not to mention meeting audit and regulatory compliance needs. You don't want to have all hands on deck anytime somebody needs a report. You want to have the right tools, policies, and procedures in place to be able to do this quickly and effectively. These are best practices that most of you have, I'm sure, to at least some degree. All must have to some degree or another. It just so happens our product helps automate some of them. Okay, with that, let's get to the heart of the matter, which is what organizations can and should do to help prepare for a breach. And so, having set the table in this fashion, I'll now advance the slide and hand it over to Bob.
Thanks, Ted. A couple of slides ago, there was a big star in the middle of one of them that talked about brand impact and how an organization responds to a breach, getting notifications out, internal communications, external communications, how quickly they become aware of it. All are going to help to protect the brand if they're done right moving forward. The numbers that you've seen on breaches that Ted shared with you are the things that are tangible, are things that are there from fines or lawsuits, but you can never tell what the lost revenue is going to be. So the process I'm going to share with you in the discussion I'm going to go through is going to really focus on 3 questions. How does your staff, how do your employees notify you that there's been a potential data breach? The second is, how do you decide that this incident that's been reported actually is a data breach event? Because there's always some discussion of the number of different departments and perspectives that people have on there being a data breach. And finally, how are your external communications coordinated? And the fact is, by thinking about these questions up front, putting some plans in place allows you to do the organization so that when the rubber meets the road and a breach does happen, that you have a coordinated effort, it's something that's familiar, people know how to react, And some of the artifacts that you need to share with the public are already in place. You don't look all mixed up. Next slide. Good. Thanks. Thanks. So I'm not going to focus one slide talking about incident management, but really going to focus on 3 steps in the process. Once the Chief Privacy Officer and Chief Security Officer are aware that something might have happened, they need to make a decision whether this has been a data breach or not. Then talk about establishing an event management team that determines what the scope of the event is and makes a recommendation back to those 2 officers on how to proceed. And finally, an event communication plan that talks about how information is given to the public, how information is given to internal stakeholders, so that you have a plan up front, you know who's doing the talking, you know what the artifacts are that are in place to do the presentation to them. Okay. So let's just talk briefly about incident management. Most incident management processes today are owned by an IT organization, and that's good. They know how to run help desks. They collect the information. They usually, though, are focused on data processing incidents, not necessarily that somebody's lost a notebook or someone has lost a batch of paper that had Social Security numbers on it, for example. Those systems are also very much metrics-oriented. If you talk to the people who run help desks, they want to know, they're very proud of what their response time is, what the resolution time was, how long it takes to close a ticket. The closing of the ticket, though, may not resolve the problem. It may have some remediation steps to it, but it may not address the whole thing. The other aspect of an incident reporting system owned by IT is generally they're not anonymous. So if you have a potential breach incident, or a breach situation, there may be some reason that someone may want to report that without revealing who they are. The one that comes to mind to me that I've seen happen is where a development team uses production data in a development environment, which is hopefully contrary to the processes in your organization, the policies in your organization. Well, if somebody knows about that, they want to report it, they may want to be anonymous because they don't want to be perceived as disloyal to their management and to the rest of the project team. Unfortunately, help desks, as they're set up, generally do not support that anonymous reporting. One strategy to deal with all of these things is to set up the incident management process so that an incident can be closed within the help desk system itself, but it gets passed off to another team. In this case, I'm suggesting to the privacy and security teams to work on it. That they'll, in fact, maintain either in a separate system or through some other mechanisms all of the information that's needed to really work the breach from a business standpoint, not necessarily from an IT standpoint. One other consideration about using a separate system is that a number of people do have access to incident management systems. There's the people that are running it. There are the people that are generating reports from it. Generally speaking, you can look up somebody else's incident just by knowing a ticket number. Separating how you're dealing with a breach event from the incident management system will limit the number of people who do have access to what's happened and how it's being addressed. And that will help keep the rumor mill down and hopefully help control communications going out. Finally, I really encourage you to look at how non-IT events are being addressed. Are they handled routinely? Who has responsibility for that? The people who have responsibility for that know how to flag a data breach event, potential data breach event. Well, where are they tracked? And one thing you'll keep hearing me say, and there's a slide on this later, is has it been tested recently? So let's go back to the process. The incident management system or the incident management process has now found that there's a potential breach incident. It's raised to the Chief Privacy Officer or the Chief Security Officer. They think about it. They say, well, there may be a breach here. what do you do next? What's the next step to determining how to go? And that's to engage an event management team. Okay, next slide. So the event management team is really cross-functional. Their goal is to initially determine the scope and the impact of the event. Longer term, they'll coordinate the remediation effort. So let's figure out if we've got a problem here, how big is it? Let's report back to the people who are making decisions on how to proceed, and then let's go fix the problem while the fire is being put out and handled. Generally, the chief privacy officer or someone that he or she designates would run this. The core team should represent a variety of different groups, certainly legal, privacy, a compliance organization. I suggest the incident management team be part of it since they're escalating the event in, and generally IT just because of the nature of losing data. Once a team's established, and other members get added based on the event. For example, if a set of credit card receipts was lost, you may want to have, out of a set of retail stores, you may want to have the loss prevention team from those retail stores involved as well. Once this group's identified, a plan really does need to be established. And the plan should really set expectations for everyone about what they're going to do, what their goals are, as well as what's going to be reported back. So defining what artifacts are going to be collected, defining what artifacts are going to be produced, what the initial report time frame is. So once this team gets established, how quickly should they get back to the chief security officer, chief privacy officer to make a decision, and what should the contents of that initial report be? I suggest that after all the discussion they have, all the fact-finding that they do, that group should be making a recommendation back to the decision makers to decide, so they can figure out what the next steps will be. Let's take a look at what the different artifacts are that they can collect. We certainly want to know that the facts related to the event, what information was lost, was the data encrypted or not? If the data is not encrypted, that may, or was encrypted, it may reduce the amount of reporting back you have to do to attorneys general, for example. Are you still losing data, or has it been stopped? I mean, how much of an emergency is remediation? Have we really closed the incident? When it happened, how long it took, where it was lost? Was it lost from a server in the U.S.? Was it lost from a server internationally? That will have some impact on who has to be reported to as far as law enforcement is concerned. Who was affected? Were they citizens of a particular state? Were they citizens of another country? Was it only internal people? Was it only associates or employees of the company that are involved? Where they reside? Can the data be recovered? And potentially, can the data be recovered with a guarantee that it wasn't misused or disclosed to further parties? That will help when you go back to the attorneys general as well. Turning to the legal team and the privacy team, what are the applicable laws? What are notification requirements? And some things that people tend to forget are what's the impact to other applications within your enterprise, and what's the impact on other organizations? So if you look at the recent breach, some of the recent breaches that have happened, with user IDs and passwords going out, there's always an impact on other companies because people tend to use the same user IDs and passwords for those online systems. You want to be sure that you're the one that's doing the notification going out to the public that something has happened and taking responsibility and remedial actions for it before someone turns around and does that for you. Just a note on the notification requirements. There are certainly legal requirements for notification. All the state laws have them internationally as well. There's always the question, though, of what's the right thing to do. Some of the laws conflict as far as notification is concerned, but you need to incorporate what your corporate culture is. What does position you want to have as a company, what you want to share, what happened, how deep you want to go. The laws may say that you don't need to notify in a particular situation, but you as an organization may decide, yeah, it's the right thing to do, we're going to let people know. So taking all this information, the team will hopefully get together, coalesce it into a report, and then go back to create or provide that information with the recommendation back to the Chief Privacy Officer and Chief Security Officer. So go to the next slide. The CPO and the CSO has to make a decision at that point. Is this really a breach? Is the recommendation to move forward and get everybody at the C level turned up about a potential problem? Do we need to go notify people? Is this really a big deal or not? And making an assumption that they do, the next thing to do is to establish a communications team, leveraging hopefully a plan that's been created before that. While that plan is being put in place, of course, the event management team is still working on the remediation process for closing down to make sure the event doesn't happen ever again. So just let's go to the next slide, talk about the communications plan. It has a couple of different focuses. Number one, it identifies members of the event communication team. So I have a slide coming up that talks about who would be there, but most importantly, in addition to just enumerating who they are, how do you get in touch with those people, even on off hours? It may be an event that requires immediate attention. You want to have people's cell phone numbers and home numbers to be able to get in touch with them as quickly as possible. You also want to have backups for each of those individuals to make sure that if in the event they're on vacation or they're unreachable for some other reason, that there's somebody to represent them on the team. The plan also defines the communication parameters for outbound communications. Who talks to who and when do they do that communication? Who handles the communication to the associates to train everybody in your, on your team, in your company, about what they're allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say? Who's going to talk to law enforcement? Who's going to talk to the press? And finally, there should be a framework for communications established in the plan. And we'll talk more about each of these over the next couple of slides. So if we look at the team, there are a number of stakeholders who have an interest in what's happened. Certainly customers and employees, your own marketing department, because they're going to have to address the brand damage. Media is certainly going to be all over the data loss, as Ted shared earlier in the presentation. Law enforcement, attorneys general, other government organizations are going to be involved, and your shareholders are going to want to know what's happening. As a minimum for the team members, I'm suggesting that someone from marketing, public relations, your internal communications group all be involved, that someone from security loss prevention is there, as well as legal, investor relations, and your chief privacy officer. In fact, I'm suggesting that senior people be involved at all, from all organizations as members of these teams, because these are the people who are going to make the decisions about who talks to who and when. Of course, there may be a requirement to add other organizations to this. If it's an internal incident, you may want to have human resources involved, for example. So this is just an initial framework, a foundation, if you will, for who I'm suggesting the team members be. Okay. Next slide. Next. So I mentioned communication parameters. You don't want to have a lot of people providing information about what happened and what the response is going to be. Those communications will tend to get muddled, and sometimes they may even be contradictory. So it's important to identify spokespeople that are going to have specific responsibilities. For example, you probably want to have the legal team talking to AG's office and other government agencies. You may want to have security talking to law enforcement, someone from the public relations group talking to the media. But the goal here is to limit the communication to those specific designees, and that other people in their organizations have to understand how important it is to defer to those spokespeople to get the message out, and not go beyond what's been told. In a situation like this, when you're under scrutiny, you want to make sure you have a consistent message, and you want to make sure that it's the right message. The message content should be reviewed by the communications team, all messages that go out, again, to have that consistent messages, and in fact, to make sure it's put in the right terminology and that it's relevant. Most important, to make sure that the facts are correct. So there's going to be an interaction between the communications team and the event management team to verify that the information being provided is actually accurate. Did the data breach happen in the way that said it was going to be, that's being reported, and is the remedial action being taken and things being protected the way that the message is saying it's going to be done? This group also needs to keep the executive leadership informed. Frequent updates from the chairs, not only of the communications team, but the event management team, are important. But I'd suggest that you use the executives as spokespeople fairly sparingly. And the reason for that is that if, in fact, the message starts to get out of hand, or if it's not presented properly and the media starts reacting in a negative way, if an executive, if the CEO, for example, gave the initial message, there's no one to come back to clarify things later at a higher level. So the first thing out of the gate, use the other executives on the team, but if you need to at a later date, then get the CEO and the COO involved. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. From a framework standpoint, most of the communications can be written ahead of time. The details of the specific event can be added at the time of the event. But if you think about it, the vast majority of the content of press releases or letters or emails that are going to customers can be written ahead of time. Websites updates about a breach notification is prescribed by a number of the state laws. You can start putting a template together now based on that information. Even the talking points to the media, if you get the right people sitting around the table in a room, you're going to come up with 15, 20, 30 talking points that are going to be common no matter what the breach situation is. Get those in place, get the templates in place, get the press releases written now, and add the details to it later on. It's going to get everybody's approval, all your approval cycles up front. It's going to eliminate a lot of lag and notification. It will allow you to be up front at the time communications have to go out at a later date. And finally, and this is the most important thing to me, is to just test. There are a couple of reasons for this. Mostly it's the muscle memory, if you will. If people have gone through a test and they're familiar with the processes, and they've gone through an exercise where they're running through the process and making themselves familiar with the policies, when the real event happens, nothing is going to be a surprise. You don't want to be training people on the policy up front. And you can, or at the time of the event. If you do a training up front, say a classroom situation, that's great, but people really don't remember it until they use it. So there are really two common types of testing. Tabletop exercises allow you to do multiple scenarios. Sitting around a conference room, all the key participants are there, or representatives of the key participants. For example, you don't want to tie the CEO up for a few hours discussing this. You can go through the process. So someone who owns incident management talks about how it's reported, how it's diagnosed, then how it's passed up to the chief privacy officer. They talk about what they're going to do, and so on through the entire process. You can do multiple scenarios like that, and that's a very effective and cost-effective way of going through multiple exercises and getting people familiar with how the process works. The one that's more fun, the one that gets people more excited and certainly gets more buzz around that you're preparing, is having the scenario run as if it was a real-life event. You define one scenario. Participants are notified when they show up in the morning that the exercise is occurring, and it's going to be identified in a particular way. But incident management gets the incident, and you actually run through the entire process, start to end. It may take 1 day, it may take 2, it may take a week. And at the end, all the tools that you've used, all the processes that you're going to use have been tested. People are familiar with it. You can get the key participants together to do a brief debrief to see whether things have worked or not, and then cycle back and improve your processes and policies. Next slide. Just some other considerations. I mentioned the system of record. I do feel very strongly, because of the type of information that's contained when an event happens, that it be kept in a separate system from the standard incident management system. Think about your methods of communication. Do you want to send an email blast to everyone in the company telling them this is what happened, this is how they should address it if it's brought up to them? Or do you want to hold a company-wide conference call or meeting in order to do that verbally? Remember, emails tend to get forwarded on no matter what the disclaimers at the beginning of it said. Finally, you need to think about independent divisions for a couple of reasons. From a multinational standpoint, if you have divisions in other parts of the world, they're going to be more familiar with the local customs, and they're going to be approached by the local media, the local law enforcement to provide responses. Certainly, you're going to want to have your headquarters group involved and visible, but the multinational divisions really should have a strong role, if not a lead role, in helping get these messages out. Acquired businesses take on a whole nother aspect. When a business gets acquired, many times it continues to run independently. Sometimes their policies are a little bit disjoint, if you will, from the corporate policies. So you need to make sure that they understand what their role is, what the corporate role is, not necessarily to rein in the independence, but certainly to make sure that there's a coordinated message going out from all parts of the business. And finally, recognize brands. How do you want to respond? There was a Skype breach, I think, in the past couple of weeks. Do you want the response to come from Skype, or do you want the response to come from Microsoft? So that's a decision that has to be made early on about who's going to respond and who the spokespeople are, and what the brand is that's going to be responding, if you will. Yeah. That's an overview of a process and a set of mechanisms to prepare for a breach. Ted, have there been any questions that have come in?
Yes, there have. Thanks very much, Bob. There was some really great stuff in there. Some new stuff to me, and we've talked to a lot of different organizations out there, so high value content. Thanks. We have had a couple questions come in. I'll go through some of those now, but if you've got some other questions you'd like to put in, please use the Q&A functions within GoToWebinar to do that. Let's see here. One question that came in is, are there particular components of the plan that you've outlined here, Bob, that you think organizations tend to struggle with, maybe more than some others?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I've been involved with the initial part of putting these plans together, one of the more difficult things have been who should be on these various teams, who should be part of this notification list that an event happened. Because at first everybody says, especially at the senior level, I want to be involved. And then they recognize what it entails and what the responsibilities are and what they may be, and they realize, well, maybe not. And the longest part of putting these plans together has actually been getting the participant list. The second thing is then being able to schedule the testing. It's something that's not an immediate need. It's not something that's revenue generating. It's not the crisis of the day. It's like insurance. It's preparation. And getting a good test bed in place and getting a good test scenario in place and getting the people to dedicate the time to do it is sometimes a struggle.
Yeah, I believe it. Probably you can perennially postpone that, and that's not good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Here's another question that came in. We require that our CPO/CISO is an attorney to further protect communications related to internal investigations. It seems that many organizations are moving towards this staffing model as well. Are you seeing a migration towards this?
Yeah, actually, what I started seeing is more a general compliance officer that is an attorney, as opposed to a chief privacy officer, a chief information security officer. You know, you're trying to protect, I assume from the question, they're trying to protect communications through attorney-client privilege. I'm not an attorney. I'll be the first to say that. So I would talk to, you know, your own internal legal counsel about how much protection that does really give you. But I have seen more and more attorneys working as just compliance officers in general, senior compliance officers in general. Are you still there? Are there additional questions?
Phone dropped.
Ed?
Hey, sorry, lost the connection there, but I'm back. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, did have a couple other questions come in, Bob. Any lessons learned, something that maybe wasn't obvious or that, you know, with the hard-earned experience you wished you could have handled differently?
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, my previous role, Staples was a global organization grown through acquisition. Sometimes when you're sitting in headquarters, you don't realize how important the independence is of to the folks that are out in the field and running these other businesses. You know, we're from corporate, we're here to help, and you'll do what we say, sometimes comes across. You need to take the time to build a relationship with these different organizations and get them involved to take ownership of the privacy aspect in general. What we found is we went through later iterations of the rollout of our various policies and plans, is there were some things that we, from a headquarters perspective, hadn't thought of, and we were able to learn from those outlying businesses to get more information. And by having their buy-in early in, it really did, it started to make a difference to their adoption of our policies and principles, as well as the participation in any of the event planning we did.
All right, that's cool. So not only were you able to sort of improve your best practices because you learned about a new approach or a new scenario you needed to deal with, but going through that process you had more buy-in from that group, which probably made the execution of that go better.
Absolutely. And one of the things, you and I were talking a little bit about this before we got on, one of the things that was really successful, we actually learned from Microsoft, is the establishment of a privacy community, where the privacy community is comprised of people out in the field, out in the outlying parts of the business, and they become privacy champions and support what you're trying to do. By having them involved in providing input to everything that's going on, including the breach planning, it gives some ownership back. It gets that feedback from them and the input from the field more readily, especially when you're dealing with international considerations. Again, in the U.S. we have a very different attitude than other parts of the world about privacy. The laws are very different, and having somebody out there to support it through, say, a privacy community helps quite a bit.
Nice. Let's see, here's another one that's come in. Anything about what you did while you were at Staples that you're particularly proud of, or that you really felt made things easier?
Well, it's that privacy community. It was an idea that we actually got from an IAPP meeting that Microsoft participated in and presented at, but the entire team that we had over at Staples really made that happen, really made that function. And that was probably the #1 thing that we did to take the privacy program for what it was, say, 3 years ago, to what it is today, and to make it an important part of the culture at Staples.
Great. That does it. That tackles the questions, and we're coming up on. Oh wait, hold on. There's a couple more that have come in. Maybe let me pick one more of these, and we'll call it a day. Here we go. How are you handling monitoring, in quotes, the security team? We are looking at using a keylogger for those key team members.
Wow. That's a good question. I guess I'm not quite sure what you're looking, how deep a monitoring. If you're using a keylogger, you're kind of looking over the shoulder. And,
that's pretty deep.
You know, it's one thing to do that in the U.S. with or without their knowledge. It's a different thing internationally, whether you can even do that at all. I'd be very cautious about that. Ultimately, this whole program, whether it's a security team or the privacy team, your key administrators, your senior executives that are involved in all this, ultimately you have to trust them. You have to rely on them to do their jobs. That's what you're paying them for. If you're concerned about your security team to the point that you do using keyloggers, you may want to rethink your hiring policies. Do you want to do more stringent background checks on those individuals before you feel the need to have to look over their shoulder? I get back to, you've got to rely on these people. You're paying them to do a job. You spend a lot of time hiring them and vetting them, and it's just something that you need to trust. That's why they're part of your team.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, with that, first of all, Bob and I would like to thank all of you for joining us. You can see here contact information for our two organizations. A couple other housekeeping items. We would relish any feedback on this specific webinar, so please use this information that you see here to let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, things you think we could have done different, done better, or what have you. We'd really relish any of that feedback. Secondly, I'll also remind you that we do these pretty regularly. We had one last week that was really popular. This one today with Bob, we had really great attendance figures on. And we'll try to continue to do them as regularly as we possibly can. And I'm always looking for fresh ideas on content, things that maybe you'd like to see a webinar on. Submit those to us as well. We are fortunate to have, over the past couple of years, come to know a lot of really smart people in this industry. And I would happily tap into them to make sure that whatever it is that you guys want to see a webinar about gets addressed by the best person in the industry that we can think of to make that happen. So please send any ideas for future webinars, and don't be surprised if a couple weeks later you see it show up on our calendar. Speaking of which, keep your eyes peeled on our website where we post our webinars, but also by virtue of attending today, you're in our database, and so you'll also get the notification when it happens. Because in, I believe it's 2 weeks, we're going to have another webinar with a privacy lawyer, a specialist, who leads the practice at a law firm focused in on privacy and breach response. those webinars, we've done a couple of them. They're always super popular. So keep your ears peeled. Watch your email for when we send out the notification about that one, because I believe, like I said, it's 2 weeks that'll be happening. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Bob. Thanks a ton for the great content today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, take care, everyone. Have a great day.